Hello, guys. Hope this finds you doing well. We are on week 6 of remote learning. Hope everything is kind of settling in for you, and you understand. You're feeling better about some things. And if you're concerned, I'm hoping you're asking questions, whether it be from me or administrators, whatever else you have going on. So I know this is not the most ideal situation, but we're doing the best we can. So. At this point in time, we are moving on to chapter 18. You still have your textbooks available to you. Honestly, if I were you, I'd spend a little time looking at your textbook. It's page 473. We are preparing for confidence intervals with proportions. We're going to spend the next couple weeks on this, which is really walking away from what we just have done the past couple weeks with our normal curve. So lots of times in different surveys and graphs and answers, you'll hear people say, this is based on 95% confidence. So they don't just mean when they say that, if they're giving you real data, they're not just meaning like, we're pretty sure. So what they have done is they've done some real calculations of what's going on. So let's say we know that a certain percentage of people, let's say love the color, have their favorite color being red. I'm just making up a statistic. And let's say that's 27% of the population we know loves the color red. So then we survey a sample. And every sample we pick, be it, let's say it's 100 people of our sample, we survey the sample, and we know that every time we get a group of 100 people, it's not going to be exactly 27%. It's going to range a little bit from here and there. But the first question on your notes, if you've printed your notes off from this, is what does 95% confidence really mean? And so what 95% confidence really means is simply that we know that if we have a sample size of, like I said, 100, 95% of samples of this size will be captured from this true proportion. So though 95% of samples that we run into will have the actual percentage of the group, the entire group of people that we have. So I'm going to write that sentence down. So I'm looking at your textbook. I'm writing formal definitions. So what this means is 95% confident. We are 95% confident. Oh, I really want my new stylus. 95% of samples of this size. Now, if you change the sample size, your numbers change. Will produce confidence intervals that capture the true proportion. So the more specific you make your confidence, the wider your number range is going to be. So here's an example. So in April and May of 2011, the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication and the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication interviewed 1,010 U.S. adults about Americans' global warming beliefs and attitudes. It is standard among pollsters to use a 95% confidence level, unless they otherwise state it at 99%. We'll talk about that in a second. Given that, what do these researchers mean by their confidence interval in this context? So I want you to stop and think for a second, reread the question, pause the computer if you need to, and think, what do these researchers mean when they state what they found and that they are 95% confident that their answers are correct? Okay, so what this really means is if this polling were to be done repeatedly with the same sized sample, so if you go all over the world and you ask sample sizes of 1,010, 95% of all random samples of this size would yield confidence intervals that contain the true proportion. The real answer. The percentage of people who really have these thoughts on global warming. So when we then start to hear things about margin of error, so margin of error, but really in your head should be making you think about how far am I really off? How much error movement do I have? So the more confident we want to be, the larger the margin of error must be. So let's think about this based off of our normal curve. Now remember, let's say we have our what we think is our true proportion. And we go out here and we say 68% of our data falls in there. And then 95% of our data falls in there. And then 99% of our data fall in there. So if we want to be 99% confident that we actually capture our real proportion, we need to make our margin of error pretty large because we're going to make sure that we actually capture the true answer. So we want to widen that margin of error. We want to widen those confidence intervals so that we have a really good chance of catching the true proportion inside the range that we get. So the more confident we have to be, the larger the margin of error must be, because we want to make sure that we catch our information. And maybe it was like we said it was here, and maybe we're way off. Maybe it's over here. But if we go way out here, we're 99.7% sure that we're going to catch our true proportion of the actual data. So most of the time, you find textbooks talking about 90% confident or 95. Not textbooks necessarily. You might find it in the news. Or, you can be in textbooks and you can be in studies and research development, but just in general, when we're talking about data, the most commonly chosen confidence levels are 90%, 95%, and 99%. That's 68% that we're talking about earlier in our normal curve. If someone told you some data and they said, hey, I'm 68% sure that is going to be true, you'd be like, well, 68%. I don't really know if I should believe you. So the most commonly chosen are 90%, 95%, and 99%. So I'm going to stop this video there so it stays a little short, and then I want to jump back on and I'm going to do question 1 and question 2 on video recording, and then if you want to tune in for question 3 on our Google Meet, remember those are Wednesdays at 11. Yes, Wednesdays at 11.